Hi there, Scope readers. I'm so excited to take you behind the scenes of my latest article, Disaster in Space. It's the story of the Apollo 13 explosion, one of the worst disasters in the history of spaceflight. In April 1970, 3 astronauts were sailing through space on a journey to the moon until a massive explosion tore through their spaceship,
Houston, we've had a problem.
leaving them stranded 200,000 miles from Earth. The entire world held its breath as the crisis unfolded, praying for Apollo 13's safe return. Researching a story like this is like taking a voyage. And while I didn't actually leave the Earth, I did visit some fascinating places in the books I read, the videos I watched, and the articles I studied. If I had been able to write an entire book, I would have been able to share most of what I learned with you. But I wasn't writing a book. I was writing an article for Scope. I wanted the article to be a focused story about Apollo 13. That meant that lots of the fascinating information that I discovered would not make it into the article. That was really frustrating for me because there was so much more I wanted to tell you. I wished I could climb into my own little spacecraft and fly to all of your classrooms to answer your questions. But in the end, I guess that wasn't so realistic. And anyway, I had a pretty good idea of what kinds of questions might be on your mind. Like this one. How was America able to catch up with Russia so quickly in the space race? How is it possible that we went from never launching a space rocket to putting a man into space in just a few years? Well, we actually had a pretty big head start, and that's because we had already been working on rockets. The first American rockets weren't really for space travel. They were for weapons. During World War II, scientists were working to develop rockets that could launch explosives over long distances, even over oceans. World War II ended in 1945. But American scientists kept working to perfect rockets. So when Russia surprised America by launching Sputnik 1 into space, we were already close to the rocket technology we needed to launch a satellite, and then a human, into space. You might also be wondering, how did NASA choose its astronauts? The answer? Very carefully. NASA officials had a very clear picture of the perfect astronaut. The first astronauts were all experienced pilots. Some had been heroes in World War II. Most were test pilots. They stepped into the cockpits of jets that had never been flown before. Bottom line, these people were brave. But NASA didn't just want daredevils who loved to fly at high speeds. An astronaut needed brain power, high-level math skills, and the ability to think quickly and solve problems. There were also physical requirements. You had to be in perfect health and top-notch shape, younger than 35 and shorter than 6 feet. Otherwise, you might not fit into the spacecraft. On top of all that, you needed to fit a certain image, clean-cut and all-American. And back in the 1950s and 60s, if you were not a white man, your chances of becoming an astronaut were slim. Racism and prejudice kept people out of many professions through the 1960s, and space travel was one of them. Today, America's space program includes women, African Americans, Latinos, people from all different cultures and backgrounds. Like Sunita Williams, who holds the record for the most time spent on spacewalks by any woman in the world. And Robert Satcher, a surgeon and chemical engineer who flew on the space shuttle Atlantis. One last question I want to answer. What became of the astronauts of Apollo 13 after they landed safely on Earth? Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes arrived home to find that they had become celebrities. Jim Lovell continued working at NASA until 1973, but he never returned to space. He wrote a best-selling book about Apollo 13, which was later made into an Oscar-winning movie. Jack Swigert also never returned to space. He left NASA in 1973 to start a career in politics. Fred Hayes remained at NASA for another decade as a test pilot for space shuttles. Still have questions about the article? Why don't you just write to me here at Scope? But even better, there are some great resources that you can dive right into. Check out NASA's website. Read an upcoming book by our good friend and Scope contributor Todd Olson. Explore the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum's website. In other words, go on your own research journey. I promise it will be a thrilling one.